Every morning started the same way for Merritt. She checked the medicine stock, looked over the appointment list, and got IVs ready for the diabetics in cell block 3. Her small world was the medical unit in the West Wing of Oak Creek Maximum Security Prison. After 3 years on the job, she knew every inch of it. At 9:30, the usual routine began. Prisoners came in one by one with a guard complaining of headaches, old injuries, and trouble sleeping. Merritt noted their symptoms, handed out medicine, and dressed wounds. Her hands moved automatically, but she always listened carefully. It made the inmates feel like people, not just numbers. Everything was normal until a new patient arrived at the start of the second shift. A guard brought in a tall man with a bandage on his arm. Rafe Caldwell hurt his arm in the laundry, the guard said, handing over his file. While Merritt read the notes, Rafe looked around the room quietly. Despite the handcuffs, he stood with a relaxed posture. His face was strong and calm, with sharp gray eyes that watched everything closely. The injury was a minor burn, and as Merritt treated it, she felt his muscles tense under her touch. There was a warmth to him that made her pause for a second longer than she should have. "Miss Hope, everything all right?" Greta Stern, the head nurse, called from the doorway. Merritt quickly finished wrapping the bandage. Greta was known for being strict and suspicious. She always insisted on following rules to the letter. That evening at home, Merritt tried to relax with a new book, a romance about a woman falling for a mysterious man with a troubled past. Normally, she would get lost in the story, but tonight her thoughts kept drifting back to Rafe, his steady gaze, his quiet confidence. She put the book down and looked in the mirror. She had never thought much of her looks. Plain brown hair, always tied up, no makeup, and a loose uniform that hid her figure. But tonight, she let her hair down and touched the back of her neck, feeling different. She turned away quickly, thinking like this was dangerous. That night, she dreamed of bright lights in the infirmary and footsteps in the hall. The next morning, as she got ready for work, she pulled out an old bottle of perfume. Just a tiny drop. She told herself today would be like any other, but deep down she knew it wouldn't. In the following 2 weeks, Rafe came back 5 times. First for his burn, then for headaches, insomnia, and vague complaints of feeling unwell. Merritt suspected he was making up reasons to see her, but she had to follow procedure. His file said, Rafe Caldwell, 38 years old, 15-year sentence for armed robbery. Merritt avoided reading the details of his crime, as was the unspoken rule in the infirmary. But sometimes at night, she found herself imagining how he committed the robbery, picturing the gun in his hands. The thought made her nervous, yet intrigued. Greta began to notice Rafe's frequent visits. "Miss Hope, does inmate Caldwell really need all this medical attention?" Greta asked one morning, her sharp eyes watching. Merritt listed his symptoms, staying calm. There was nothing wrong with the records, but she started paying more attention to how she looked. Her uniform was always neatly pressed, and she added a soft scarf to her outfit. "Just trying to look professional," she told herself in the mirror. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. One day, Rafe asked her to check his blood pressure. As she touched his wrist, she felt his pulse quicken. "You care a lot about your patients, Miss Hope," he said softly. She quickly stepped back, pretending to focus on the readings. After work, she walked through the park, thinking about him, wondering what he would be like outside the prison walls, in normal clothes, living a different life. The thoughts grew stronger every day. She borrowed books on criminal psychology, reading about people who turned to crime for love, desperation, or excitement. She started to wonder if Rafe was truly guilty, or if he had been forced into it. One morning, Rafe limped in, saying he pulled a muscle at the gym. As she examined him, she felt a shiver run down her spine at the touch of his skin. The moment passed quickly, but it stayed with her all day. Greta began watching her more closely, noticing the small changes, new hair clips, a touch of lipstick. "Keep your distance from inmates," she reminded Merritt firmly. In the locker room, Merritt overheard other nurses talking about Rafe, calling him handsome. Jealousy flared inside her. The thought of him looking at someone else, the way he looked at her, bothered her more than it should. She started checking her appearance before every shift, fixing her hair, refreshing her lipstick. She hated feeling this way, but she couldn't stop. Something about him pulled her in. Rafe never crossed the line, always polite and reserved, but his long glances spoke volumes. Their interactions were filled with unspoken tension. One day, as he handed her his file, his hand lingered on hers for a second longer than necessary. The touch was brief, but Merritt felt it deep in her skin. For the rest of the day, she kept thinking about it, absent-mindedly touching the spot where his fingers had been. And just like that, the infirmary no longer felt the same. Late at night, Merritt could hardly sleep, tossing and turning in bed as vivid fantasies consumed her thoughts. Her mind wandered to chance encounters in empty hallways, unspoken words and forbidden touches. Each morning, she would stare at her reflection in the mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back. Her eyes sparkled with a newfound intensity, and her cheeks flushed more often. She knew she was treading dangerous ground, yet she couldn't bring herself to stop. In early November, the infirmary grew quiet earlier than usual. Most of the prisoners had returned to their cells after dinner, and the corridors were filled only with the occasional footsteps of the guards. Merritt was finishing her shift when Rafe appeared at the doorway, escorted by a guard. "He has a laceration on his forearm. Needs treatment," the guard reported. Rafe sat silently on the couch, rolling up his sleeve to reveal a long but shallow cut. Merritt slipped on her gloves and began cleaning the wound, trying to ignore the warmth of his skin beneath her touch. "This might sting a little," she warned softly, dabbing antiseptic onto the cut. Rafe didn't flinch. Instead, he watched her hands closely. When she reached for the bandage, his fingers brushed lightly over her wrist. The touch lasted only a second, but it burned through the latex glove. After that night, Merritt found herself staying for extra shifts more often. She told herself it was dedication to her work, but deep down she was waiting for him to return. The infirmary felt different in the evening, quieter with fewer prying eyes. She suspected Rafe knew it too. One night, after another routine treatment, she found a neatly folded note slipped into his chart. Her heart pounded as she unfolded it. "You are the most beautiful thing I have seen in the last 5 years." Merritt's cheeks burned as she tucked the note into her pocket, rereading it over and over until the words blurred before her eyes. She imagined him writing those words, thinking of her. The note became a treasured secret, proof that her feelings weren't one-sided. The next day, she dusted off an old bottle of perfume she saved for special occasions, a light floral scent. She styled her hair in soft waves and added a touch of eyeliner. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a different woman, revitalized, hopeful, and caught in a whirlwind of emotions. That evening, she deliberately stayed late. Rafe's wound required regular care, and she'd scheduled his appointment as the last of the night. After logging it as an urgent procedure, he arrived, escorted by a tired guard. "You can wait outside," Merritt told the guard, explaining that she needed privacy for a thorough examination. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for fresh bandages. "Take off your robe so I can access the wound more easily," she said, trying to maintain professionalism. Rafe didn't just roll up his sleeve. He slowly removed the entire robe, holding her gaze. Merritt froze. The intimacy of the moment was too intense, too far from her innocent daydreams, and yet she felt an undeniable thrill. She should have called security, ended it then and there, but instead she stepped closer. His hands found her waist, pulling her toward him, and in that instant, reality dissolved. From that night on, they found any excuse to meet. The back room of the infirmary became their secret haven. Merritt perfected the art of forging plausible journal entries to justify Rafe's frequent visits. He spoke of misunderstood intentions, of the accident that landed him in prison, and how no one had ever understood him the way she did. Merritt absorbed every word, convinced she saw the real Rafe, the man hidden behind the inmate number. She began to believe their love could change him, imagining a future together once he was free. Rafe fueled her dreams, speaking of remorse and a desire for redemption. Every touch and glance carried the promise of a new beginning. But others started to notice. Greta Stern, the head nurse, grew suspicious. Her sharp eyes followed Merritt's movements, especially when Rafe was around. "Miss Hope, don't you think you're spending too much time on one patient?" Greta asked one afternoon. Merritt shrugged, masking her nervousness behind professional dedication. Their secret meetings continued. Rafe found ways to slip notes into her belongings, her robe pocket, her medical forms. Merritt cherished them, reading his words in solitude and feeling his presence even when he wasn't there. But with each meeting, Rafe's gaze changed. There was a predatory hunger in his eyes that both thrilled and unsettled her. She knew she was crossing a dangerous line, but the exhilaration of forbidden love overpowered any sense of caution. She found herself drawn to romance novels, imagining herself as the heroine of a passionate love story. Fantasy and reality blurred together, creating an intoxicating mix she couldn't escape. One evening, as she leaned over him to inspect his wound, he whispered against her neck, "You smell so sweet." Her knees weakened, but just then, footsteps echoed in the hallway, and she hurried away. Greta's surprise inspections grew more frequent. She checked the logs, the medication supplies, and questioned other nurses. Merritt felt the scrutiny but couldn't pull away from Rafe. The whispers among her colleagues grew louder. She heard fragments of their gossip, noticed their knowing glances, but it no longer mattered. Her entire world had shrunk to stolen moments and secret notes. By mid-November, Greta called her into the office. "Miss Hope, I've noticed changes in your behavior. Perhaps you should take a vacation." Merritt forced a polite smile and declined, insisting she was fine. But as she left the office, her hands trembled, not from fear but from anticipation of her next meeting with Rafe. Greta watched her closely, observing the flush in her cheeks and the dreamy haze in her eyes. The logbook contained an increasing number of entries for Rafe Caldwell. Medications were disappearing. Suspicious of Merritt's behavior, Greta stayed late one evening, sorting through paperwork under the guise of routine tasks. Merritt, oblivious to the looming danger, continued to chase the illusion she had built around Rafe, blind to the warning signs that threatened to shatter her carefully constructed fantasy. The narrative you provided appears to be a fictional account detailing the tragic consequences of a clandestine relationship between a prison nurse and an inmate. While this story is fictional, there have been real-life incidents with some similarities. For instance, in 2021, Lorena Schulte, a registered nurse at Anamosa State Penitentiary in Iowa, was killed by inmates during an escape attempt. Schulte and corrections officer Robert McFarland were attacked with hammers by inmates Michael Dutcher and Thomas Woodard, who were attempting to escape. Both inmates were later convicted of first-degree murder and are serving life sentences without parole. Additionally, in 2019, Amy Murray, a prison nurse from Missouri, was charged with first-degree murder for allegedly poisoning her husband with antifreeze. Authorities claim she wanted to marry an inmate with whom she had developed a romantic relationship. These cases highlight the potential dangers and ethical violations associated with inappropriate relationships between prison staff and inmates. Such relationships can compromise the safety and security of correctional facilities and lead to tragic outcomes. The narrative you've provided appears to depict a scenario involving a prison nurse and an inmate, culminating in the nurse's death. While this specific account doesn't directly correspond to a widely reported real-life event, there have been instances where relationships between prison staff and inmates have led to tragic outcomes. For example, in 2022, a case involving Casey White, an inmate, and Vicky White, a corrections officer, garnered significant attention. Their relationship led to an escape and a subsequent manhunt, as detailed in the Netflix documentary Jailbreak: Love on the Run. Netflix. Additionally, in June 2024, at Smith State Prison in Georgia, inmate J. Drekus Hart obtained a firearm and fatally shot kitchen worker Orion Chavea Grace before taking his own life. The incident raised concerns about security protocols within the facility. While these cases differ in specifics, they underscore the potential dangers of inappropriate relationships or security breaches within correctional facilities. As the investigation unfolded, it became evident that the clandestine relationship between Dr. Stern and inmate Rafe Caldwell had reached a tragic conclusion. The overturned instrument tray, scattered bandages, and the abruptly halted journal entry painted a vivid picture of their desperate attempt to be together. Despite Dr. Stern's foresight and efforts to gather evidence over the past 3 months, their plan was thwarted by the very system they sought to escape. In the end, their love, though genuine, could not overcome the confines of their reality, leaving behind a poignant reminder of the consequences of forbidden relationships within the prison walls.
Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more